Building an adaptable enterprise. It's Red Hat OpenShift, but if you know Red Hat, we're going to talk a little bit more about customers and community and projects. We'll talk a little bit about the products too. Just by way of introduction, if you don't know me, Stu Miniman, I'm a senior director at Red Hat. I just passed my 5-year anniversary at Red Hat, and I've been part of this community for a long time. So first came to KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, back at 2017 in Austin. I think it did snow there. No matter what location, it's always going to get a cold snap for some of these things, as we know. And if it's not cold enough here, don't worry, next year we are back in Salt Lake City, which I know people enjoyed the snow there. But even that community, I'd gone for a lot of years as an analyst to the OpenStack conferences, and we can talk and debate about what's different and changed, but a lot of the same people and a lot of the ideas that we started with OpenStack went into the cloud native ecosystem.
Yeah, hey everybody. Everybody calls me Foster. My name is Mike Foster. You see me in the hallway, that's how you'll turn my head. I started in the CNCF community in 2017, started with meetups, consulting. I finally became an ambassador this year, so this is my favorite time of the year. Coming and hanging out with everybody in the community, seeing what's new, seeing the projects they're working on, just walking down the hallway and having those chats. That's really where the magic happens in this community and these events. So again, super excited to be here. And yeah, I think we just get into the topic.
Yeah, right? and Foster's coming in from Toronto. I came in through Boston. Like many people, I ended up having a cancellation and made a few hour stop in New York City along the way.
Yeah, like I said, this is the perfect week. We all get together, 10,000 people here in Atlanta. It's going to get a little warmer, and we're going to have some parties, and we'll get into it a little bit later in the week. But again, it's the perfect feedback loop where we get to hang out with the community. You get to interact with Red Hatters and really share what you're working on so that we can move the open source community in the direction that works for you so you can solve your challenges.
All right, so topics we're going to cover. We've got about half an hour here. Virtualization. It's interesting because, remember back, OpenStack was going to, kill VMware. That was it. And Amazon too. We were going to kill both of those technologies. If there's one thing I've learned in my career in tech, nothing ever dies. Apologies to all of you that are still maintaining things way longer than you really like to, but we sort things out. The second thing, of course, AI. We're how many minutes in before we finally mentioned AI on the stage, so hope you place your bets properly on that. Developer experience. So developers, of course, hugely important. Their interaction with this ecosystem and everything we do, we'll get into. And last one, a relatively new topic for something like this, but data sovereignty and data proximity. So how many people are coming in from Europe? Yeah, so we've got a few. Thank you, it's for coming. And of course, like every time I've been meeting with somebody from Europe, this is a hot topic. But even here in North America, I think about, cloud adoption the last 15 years. The government clouds usually were some of the first data sovereignty. Canada has been doing a bunch of that.
It's a hot topic in Canada as well right now.
That topic. So yeah, we're going to dig in lots, so enough preamble.
Yeah, so I threw this slide in. I joined, like I said, the CNCF in 2017. This was a lot smaller back then, but even then we were making jokes about how big it was getting, right? So you're going to be here, you're going to be going to all the backstage cons, security cons, and you're going to see the sheer number of projects. How do we filter through these things, right? Now, Red Hat has had experience in the open source community for 30 years, and it's part of being in these events that we are able to see what users are using, how they're using it, and then we're able to, let's say, spend our resources appropriately, I think is fair. But navigating this map is extremely challenging, and so we wanted to kick it off and show exactly how Red Hat's doing that.
Yeah, that's a great setup, Foster. If we look at what has Red Hat done for 30 years, open source, in many ways, no offense, everything I've looked at, it's a little bit of chaos out there. And the question is, how much of your resources do you want to spend learning those things? Oh my gosh, there's another new project that's going to be announced tomorrow on the keynote stage, over at the Georgia Convention Center. Okay, how much time do I need to spend on that? How much do I work it into my environment? At Red Hat, if you know that we're involved in a project, number one, we're going to make it easier to use. Number two, security, of course, is going to be front and center. If Foster didn't mention already, security is his day-to-day, every day that he works on. And we're going to shift that burden from you. So when I think about the cloud era in general, not just cloud native, but what cloud brought is, I want to take some things that, as our friends at Amazon would say, were undifferentiated heavy lifting and shift it over to a platform. So that's what we've done at Red Hat for over 30 years. From an OpenShift product standpoint, we participate in all of these projects. When it makes sense, we bring them into the platform. So we've got over 50 CNCF projects that are part of OpenShift today, and we contribute to way more than that. I always love, if you go at the show, there's the project pavilion, and if you spend some time walking through there, we're not all front and center wearing Red Hat logoed gear. A lot of times we're there wearing the project gear. As I said, it's project first, and because everything we create at Red Hat is upstream, and that's what we did from a Linux standpoint, that's what we do on the OpenShift standpoint, and surprise, what are we doing in AI? We are making sure that AI still has open source as the development way that we do things. And we've seen a real shift over the last couple of years as to, starting with very proprietary models and how we think about all the different layers of AI to open source, definitely having a real important stay of it. Even our friends at OpenAI, which definitely was not open source when they started, have been moving in that nice general direction. And at Red Hat, not only do we participate in open source, we help build this ecosystem. We've got customers that contribute to the upstream projects, and we've helped them with our open source program office. And when we're at the show floor, our Linux competitors and our Kubernetes competitors, we're hanging out with them, we're talking with them because we work with them in the upstream.
Yeah, I got to see that process firsthand when Red Hat acquired StackRox. Yeah. And that was the first conversation as soon as we got bought, is when are we open sourcing, right? Now we still, obviously, security tool, we had customers in our GitHub repositories, we had to clean that up a little bit, but a year later we were open source, and we've been open source at StackRox ever since. So it was an interesting process to see all the gears behind the scenes. It was awesome.
Yeah, it's not always easy, but again, some companies and some projects do open source when it's convenient. At Red Hat, we do it when it's hard to.
Definitely. Yeah, Stu mentioned how many projects we're involved in. We're also involved in a lot of SIGs upstream. You'll see that at the bottom, like the code of conduct, security response, steering. We are actively engaged in a lot of these communities. And so you're going to sit down with PMs, various people you're not going to know, but they're sitting on a SIG right now, and your feedback is super important. If you have some priority, make sure it's well known, because again, you can help steer those upstream conversations without opening 1,000 Jira tickets.
Yeah, and as Amy said this when she was up here too, your feedback is so important. This is, by far one of the most important weeks for us because we're going to get that just unvarnished feedback from all of you.
And again, open source it doesn't move without all of the customers and all the feedback that we have from people like you, right? You keep and you move the resources in the open source community based on what you need. And there's a reason why OpenShift and Kubernetes has grown so much. It's because they have customers, every geo, every industry, and it keeps growing because it's trying to solve all those issues for all those companies and organizations.
Yeah, and one of the things I love, when I think back to early in my career, every time I'd meet with a customer, felt like you had to be under NDA. So especially, I've spent a lot of time talking to financial services, and it would be like, oh, you've got to be under this really heavy NDA. And today, like on Wall Street, a lot of the financial services get together a couple times a year to talk about like what they're doing in the networking space, for example, and they'll put out minutes. I was talking at breakfast this morning with some of the Ford people, and we were talking about like, what is our IP versus like how we use cloud, how we use cloud native architectures. That's something we all need to do. And to quote one of the folks, he's like, no, there's the right way to do things, and we should all understand this and know it. And that's what, we learn at these events sometimes is like, hey, that thing that's now been around for 6 months that maybe I haven't gotten to take advantage of it, my peers or, my partners are going to help me to get to that.
Yeah, let's get into the first topic. We talked about and we talked about open source. Stu, you're heavily involved, especially as an analyst before you came to Red Hat. What's the virtualization landscape look like? Modernizing virtualization solutions?
Wait, come on. I was brought on at Red Hat to talk about cloud. Why am I talking about this VMware stuff again after, I started working on that over 20 years ago? It's interesting times, but absolutely. Some things have changed. We've been on a journey for over a decade. I think it's like 15 years in the industry. We talk about app modernization. How do we modernize things? And we understand modernizing the application has been the long pole in the tent. Love VMware. I first worked with it back at ESX 1.5.2. Heavy impact on my career. But one of the challenges of virtual machines were you took an application, and a lot of times the operating system or even the hardware that it was running on was going to be end of life. Is that application really serving the users all that well? Well, I don't know, but let's just shove it in a VM and leave it running for another 5 years because it's too expensive or too difficult for us to do that. So updating the application we know is tough, and even today, modernizing applications isn't necessarily the easiest. So modernizing virtualization is something we've been talking about in this ecosystem for quite a while. So at Red Hat, we've been part of virtualization for well over a decade. It's interesting. VMware is what most people think about for virtualization, but if you look at KVM, it's what's used in every cloud but one. So if I'm using EC2, if I'm using all the other compute things, the cloud providers are using virtualization, and KVM is the default out there. Well, what did the cloud native ecosystem do? They said, how do we take that wonderful stuff that we did in KVM, we also did in OpenStack, but pull it into the cloud native environment? That of course is the KubeVirt project. So modernizing virtualization is something we can do. And coming with that, there are the processes and tools that we have in this ecosystem that a lot of the virtualization admins were a little far behind it. So, God, the last 2 years, like I've talked tons about GitOps. I remember when we launched, Argo as a, fully generally available solution in this ecosystem, and the customers were all very excited about it. So to be able to add that to my virtual machines and do the same management and orchestration with virtual machines that I've been doing with containers for a lot of years was very exciting for people. So modernizing that operations is there. And developer productivity. If I look at, again, one of those gaps in a traditional virtualization environment is my developer doesn't think about it. I just had kind of an iceberg for that application, I put it in there. We've talked about DevOps for over a decade. We're going to talk about things like platform engineering a lot at this conference. So helping to bring together your dev and your ops and work on your applications is pretty important. From a customer standpoint, again, we'd love to be able to say that I have a magic wand where you can say like, hey, I've got thousands of virtual machines, now make it modern. We have tooling. We've learned a lot over the last couple of years. We have lots of enhancements that we've made both to our product as well as working with a very broad set of ecosystem partners. If you heard the lab, the plug for that, we've got one of our storage partners in there talking about virtualization. Those of us that had the pleasure of getting virtualization working with storage and networking, a bunch of years ago, that was like a decade of really hard work. We really accelerated things because a lot of us had gone through that before. But what I've got up on the screen here is we actually have a virtualization migration assessment. So there's open source tooling from the Conveyor project that actually comes with OpenShift that can evaluate your environment, but the assessment itself actually goes through and says not only how applicable are your virtual machines to be able to modernize. We can give you kind of green, yellow, red. Green, go, yellow, little adjustment, red. Okay, we need to dig a little deeper and figure out if there's changes or do we find some alternative way to change that environment. And then here's how long it's going to take. And it's not days. We can usually ramp up. Most customers can get hundreds of virtual machines that can be migrated per day once they get that migration factory really rolling, and how much it's going to cost. What's crazy is we've done, since we launched this, it's been over a year now, we've had over 1 million virtual machines that have been assessed through this process. And almost all the customers, once they go through that, they're like, yeah, let's do it. It might take a year or more to be able to do it, but they understand we need to make that change with the understanding that hopefully this migration won't just be something that will be for a year, but something that actually sets me up for the next decade or beyond and gets me ready for all the wonderful things that we've been talking about at this ecosystem for a long time.
Yeah, and speaking of popularity, KubeVirt itself, I think since 2022, it's doubled in size. The amount of authors has tripled. So upstream, you're seeing a lot of contribution and popularity in the project. And I think to Stu's point, we've done a lot of work over the last 12 months to really get it up to enterprise grade. Things like user-defined networks, even integration in ACM and ACS. right, is huge. To be able to manage VMs and containers, to see your security information from your VMs along with your containers, all those workflows allow for that migration to be seamless. Again, this is a huge slide. Find Simon Seagrave if you want to talk more virtualization. He was walking me through all of the updates, and it's been impressive to see all the work they've done over the last year. Yeah, artificial intelligence, getting into the hot topic. We actually put AI second just because we wanted to break the mold a little bit, right? Mix it up on you guys.
Well, and the other thing is, when I talk to a lot of customers, I know I'm going to need to do AI, but if I don't take care of the challenge that I have, based on the economics of what's happening with the virtualization environment, I actually won't have, the people won't have the time, and I won't have the budget to be able to do this, because here's the thing, AI, most of you didn't get like, hey, I'm gonna add 20% budget and a bunch of headcount to be able to do AI. At Red Hat, we have an AI business unit. The first handful of people that started that AI business unit came from the OpenShift business unit. And for the first year, there was a lot of that. And that played out in almost every customer that I saw. It was a combination of people that were excited about it. Sometimes there were some people coming out of university or data scientists that are all naturally part of this activity. But AI absolutely is something. So look, here's the requisite. We've seen a lot of big waves, in the IT industry, and the waves tend to be getting bigger and bigger. AI, everybody, and I watch certain boom and bust cycles, sometimes more than others. AI looks to be, one of the biggest ones we've seen in decades. So again, our people, our personnel, everything that we're doing. Foster can tell you every time we have our one-on-ones, I'm like, cool, how are you using AI and things? He's working on a master's. It's like, okay, how does AI fit into what they're teaching you now?
Yeah, it's everywhere, and it's so prominent that I was told to make this arrow go off the chart, but I thought that was a little too corny. So we left it where it is. Yeah, it's in every facet of life, even security, right? Obviously, there are massive security challenges with AI, with prompts and prompt cleaning. But finding the platform that can do it all, that can build into those existing workflows so you don't have to overhaul everything, that's one of the biggest concerns that I see when I'm with customers talking about security.
Yeah, and just a note or two, like, look, when I meet with customers, almost all of them are like, oh my gosh, I'm behind. And the reality is, compared to your peers, even if you are a little bit behind where they are, things are changing so fast that you can actually catch up pretty early. Those that are the first, we usually say have to break a lot of glass and have a lot of challenges there. And there's sometimes use cases out there that are like, okay, does this even make sense? I couldn't believe even, I was getting off the plane in Atlanta and I saw the person in the row in front of me asking ChatGPT like how they get to the rideshare and stuff like that. I'm like, dude, there's signs. You can just walk. Like, it's really not that hard. The apps, like both, Uber and Lyft popped up on my phone and like, welcome to Atlanta. We're happy to walk you through all these things. So I don't know. You got to be careful. There was a book by Nicholas Carr a bunch of years ago called The Shallows, and said that we've traded a bunch of our regular understanding of things to Google. And what we're really worried about, like us and the next generation, don't trade how you think about things to like some app that today is very non-deterministic. So you ask it 3 times, you're going to get 3 different answers on these things, which if I'm going to the rideshare, there's really one answer that does this. So AI, architecturally, there's a lot of things going on. So one of the things I hear from customers is, first of all, there's a lot of trying things out right now. So one of the questions is, how much money am I pouring into this? And am I learning? And am I choosing the right architectural underpinnings for what we're doing? So, Red Hat, we are an infrastructure software company. And when we're here at this ecosystem, it's like, hey, does cloud native and Kubernetes, does this still make sense? Our answer is resoundingly yes. If you go hear the keynotes at KubeCon, the last 3 years, I think it's been, ever since ChatGPT launched, AI is very prominent in what we're doing. And if you haven't looked at what we're doing at Red Hat with AI, definitely recommend you take a look. So made an acquisition of a company, Neural Magic, at the beginning of the year, VLLM. Awesome technology, open source. go figure. And they were the largest contributor to that. I've worked with some of our channel partners, and they're like, oh, I've got my lab environment. I'm trying to play with this stuff. What does VLLM do? It actually integrates both with the foundational models and the hardware accelerators, but it also has certain techniques to actually get you greater utilization of the GPUs and everything. So I had one channel partner that was like, oh, learned about VLLM, put it on my lab environment, and could double how many models I could actually use in my lab environment, which if I'm testing things out, that's pretty awesome. We announced earlier this year there's a consortium on VLLM. So that is really how do I take, LLMD. How do I take VLLM and connect it to Kubernetes? So all the pipelines and GitOps that we're doing, how do we tie that together with AI? So in many ways, the shorthand is we look at what Red Hat did with Linux long ago is I had this explosion of x86, and I wanted to be able to buy servers from a number of companies and run these environments, and that's what Linux helped do and help that x86 explosion. Today, NVIDIA, of course, is the #1 accelerator out there, but a lot of customers are using TPUs with Google, and they're looking at a second source either from a technology or a cost reason or just an availability reason. So VLLM and LLMD, awesome stuff to be able to take a look at. And I know the hands-on this afternoon, they'll be able to look some more.
Yeah, it'll be great. And for the next slide, to your point earlier about the competitive aspect, you remember the Kubernetes documentary that came out, talked about Google open sourcing Kubernetes to try to shake up the cloud ecosystem? We're seeing it again in open source, right? As certain AI models go closed source, we're seeing their competitors open source. And so there is speed, you're not behind, and you get to use all these models. The biggest challenge is using it in your existing architecture or your existing hardware, not spending a lot of money and resources on solutions that you don't necessarily need to solve for, right? Figuring out how to manage your data. And the big thing is bringing your compute and your models to where your data is, right? If all your data is in the cloud, you need your AI tooling and that to be as close to the data as possible. And the power of open, again, it's going to be a huge conversation the entire week. I don't think you're ever going to get away from it. I'm kind of curious. I'm going to walk around the booth floor and snap a photo of how many people have AI on their booths. So we'll see what the over-under is. But again, there is an advantage to open source. And so being able to use that to use, things like neural magic to shrink your models so that it can live on your existing hardware. Those are going to be huge in terms of the cost-benefit analysis when you're analyzing the use of AI.
Yeah, and remember, of course, open does not mean that your data is open. So that's still important. Security, huge issue on the AI side too. So we know things are changing really fast. I expect if we got together next week after hearing everything this week, we'd have a few more comments to say, but absolutely a ton going on and definitely an opportunity for all of us to learn this week.
Yeah, 3 of 4, we're almost there. Developer experience.
Yeah. Developer. So, look, it's challenging to be a developer out there. There's certain things that the developer doesn't want to have to deal with, and one of those things is, come on, it's 2025. I mean, I've started to see some flying cars out there, but unfortunately, we have not solved the laws of physics. So, the first thing is hey, where are my apps living? If I think back, 5 or 10 years ago, it was the drive to the cloud. Everything's going to go to the cloud. It's well, look, it's over, AWS is $100 billion. Microsoft's not far behind them. Google's, doing phenomenally well, especially with the data and AI activity that have. Heck, Oracle Cloud is doing really well. So public cloud, absolutely huge growth. Still growing faster than the data center, but the data center, whether that's my data center or hosted environment, is actually been getting a lot of activity over the last couple of years. The two topics we talked about before, virtualization and AI, a lot of times, the virtualization, most of that has been in my environment. And AI, when I talk to, regulated industries, a lot of times they're like, I want disconnected. I want to be able to actually take that model, fence everything off, and really make sure that, my data's not getting everywhere because I'm not sure I trust something outside of my 4 walls. And we're like, hey, we understand that. Developers, don't want to have to think about like, oh geez, am I running in this environment, this environment, this environment? Red Hat, our Linux runs everywhere, our OpenShift runs everywhere, our AI is going to run everywhere. So from a developer
and we want
standpoint-
powerful tools. We want our developers using the tools that the organization is providing. We don't want them downloading Cursor when they're supposed to be on Developer Hub or something like that for the company, right?
Yeah.
There's a large security impact to these decisions.
And we talked about, Foster put up the CNCF landscape. There's more than 200 CNCF projects. Heck, every cloud has hundreds of services. So how do I take advantage of what is available out there but have some consistency? That's what we've been working at Red Hat for a while. And I mentioned DevOps before. GitOps has been phenomenal. It is like the number one operator that customers have been deploying on OpenShift for the last couple of years. Platform engineering, really awesome activity. When we did some research with some of our biggest customers that have been with us the longest, and if you look at their kind of 5 to 7 year journey, their end state looks a lot like what they'll be discussing over at BackstageCon today. It's the platform engineering. I want a product manager assigned. I have the developers as my constituency, and the platform itself, it gives services to what my developers need. And FinOps is also on here because, again, who's responsible for making sure that what I build actually makes financial sense and can keep track of that, so some really important things on that standpoint. All right, from a product standpoint, not only is AI a really important workload and we have certain AI products, but at Red Hat we've been putting AI into a lot of products. So if you haven't seen, pretty much at this point, all of our platforms have something called Lightspeed. So Lightspeed is just the intelligence that we build into our products, and for the most part, that is virtual assistant. So there's an OpenShift Lightspeed, which is just in the console. You can just open it up and interact in natural language. We recently announced Developer Lightspeed, which is for Red Hat Developer Hub, which is our instantiation of the Backstage project. So again, platform engineering, and what does Developer Lightspeed give us? First of all, there's a lot of documentation out there. So rather than me having to go search and find, this is where those virtual assistants are really good. I can just ask a question, it's gonna pull that information back to me. Second, I can actually take my logs from my environment and pull it into the system, and that can help me with like troubleshooting. So again, want to make it really easy to be able to deal with those things and not have to memorize or go looking through charts or data. And third, also, a lot of people are using AI for code generation, and Developer Lightspeed can actually help you generate those pipeline scripts for things like CI/CD. And our Lightspeed tools are ones that we're actually not charging extra for them. So OpenShift Lightspeed just comes with OpenShift. Developer Lightspeed just comes with Red Hat Developer Hub. We are pretty early, so please try it out and give us your feedback. One of the things, we're going to make all of these, I said right now you have to import logs. Soon we're going to make an OpenShift it like cluster aware. And one of the questions we have for you all is like, hey, how much do you want it to actually automate your environment? So if it finds an error, can it actually fix it for you? Or do you want it to be, hey, send me a notification, ask for permission? So just like when we're looking at autonomous vehicles, there's different levels along the way. So those kind of things, we're always looking for your feedback on how all this work.
Yeah, from a developer experience, it's all about integrations, right? Are you getting the vulnerability scanning results into Developer Hub in a manner where your developers can actually make a change, or are you just flooding them with information that it's not gonna make any difference, right? So it's those key workflows that we're looking for feedback from you. With OpenShift Lightspeed, if we pull information from ACS into the OpenShift console, do you want to see vulnerabilities, or do you want to see the changes that need to be made to the deployment config in order to make sure that it's using a user-defined network and that I can limit an exploit, right, or a vulnerability from breaking out? So it's those types of workflows that we're looking for feedback from you guys. AI can generate a lot of stuff. It's only as good as the data that it uses, and it's also only as good as it plugs into your workflows. So when we talk about Developer Hub, one of the biggest things that we add at Red Hat Developer Hub is those integrations into GitOps, and pulling in vulnerability information from ACS. It's those workflows, and that's where the value comes from. And I'm really excited to go to BackstageCon and see what everybody else is working on. I think it's going to be a great time.
Yeah, and those plugins aren't just for the open source projects that Red Hat participates in. Like what we did with the operator framework, which a lot of you might remember came from CoreOS. We donated that to the CNCF so that everybody could use operators. When it comes to Backstage, those plugins, things like JFrog Artifactory and many other developer tools, we want to make sure that all the ISVs can be able to plug in there. So again, helping to grow and build that ecosystem is hugely important. We are out there, with the foundation and everything, saying like, hey, come help us. We know that more hands make easier work for everybody.
Yeah, last topic, data proximity and sovereignty. It's a hot topic internally at Red Hat.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, it's an interesting one. So, I think about like when Dora was announced over in Europe and some of these things, there's been, in Europe for years now, it's been, hey, I want my data to stay in my country. But, this is a pretty complex topic because, data, of course, we know is hugely important, but, it's security and compliance and, all those things, the wonderful GRC pieces. And you might be looking like, hey, Red Hat, but you don't have a cloud, so does this impact you? And it's like, well, true, our software can run everywhere, but there are checks and things that we need to look into to make, like, how do we make sure we can actually monitor this? How do we plug into that ecosystem? So there's been a lot of work on the sovereignty side to make sure that we can become compliant on those.
Yeah, and from a security perspective, so we are just cutting the final cloud native state of cloud native security report that's going to come out from Red Hat. And one of the biggest findings in security was prompt injection and data privacy issues. And so if you're using an open model and you have on-prem, you have all this data, you want to do it in a disconnected environment when you're doing your POC evaluations, right? So we see that as a common architecture in the security landscape. Cloud sovereignty is going to be huge for that. Yes, you can have an open model, but you're going to run in Canada. You want to be next to your data. You want to do it in a way that you can use a platform your developers and operations teams are used to. So that's why this topic is really picking up. It's because we don't really want to move terabytes or petabytes of data in order to train a model that's on a cloud in a geo where we run into compliance issues. So from a security standpoint, I think security is driving a lot of those conversations.
Yeah. It is a stack if we look at it. So, we all know we're here at a conference that's very much on open source, and that transparency and trust is so important. So, when we look at something like digital sovereignty, I need to be able to understand, where's my software coming from, where's my data living, all of those pieces, up and down the stack. So, there's a framework from the EU Commission that starts to look at some of these areas and, my data, who's providing support for this environment, and, all the security operations. So, again, I remember early in my career, it was like, heck, we would have a cabinet, you lock the door and you don't plug it into the internet, and that would be, pretty good. Or, we talked about government environments. I toured the Super Nap in Vegas, and you go through a very secure door. They check your ID, and there's guys with guns walking around. It was pretty interesting environment. So making sure, again, it's not just the tech, but where does it come from, and those controls that you can put in place, which it's been a discussion we've been having in the cloud environment for a lot of years. Yeah, and
it's the secure sources of where the software comes from, right? Everything being trusted and signed. Like Steve said, I'm doing my master's right now, and I had to do a report on this, how to pick secure open source projects, and things like OpenSSF scorecard, huge for finding, is the community diverse? Who's contributing to it? Is it coming from Google and Microsoft and Red Hat, or is it just one person and they're going to be social engineered to download a Bitcoin miner into your Chromium? It's, again, hugely important to know what you're working with upstream, and that is everything through the stack. That's all your middleware, your platform, and now AI. Getting those trusted sources is going to be key. Yeah, we're almost out of time. I put this slide in because data sovereignty, it doesn't come without partners and without you guys picking your tools. You have your trusted database sources, you have your trusted networking components that you love to use. It's why we have so many great partners. And if there are any in the room, I want to thank you all again for coming out. And I know we have some people talking later. again, we wouldn't be able to give you that whole platform without the partners and without having, an open choice, an open setup so that you get to pick the solutions that you want and plug it into our platform.
Yeah, and again, I talked about from an OpenShift standpoint, we've got dozens of open source projects that fit into it, but by no means are we looking to be overly opinionated. If there's a tool or an ISV that you're looking to leverage, that's okay. What we've been talking about for years is batteries are included, but they're optional and they're swappable. The fun one lately is our friends at IBM made the acquisition of HashiCorp. I'm not going to go into the open source nature of what's going on over there, but from a HashiCorp standpoint, we've been doing a ton of integration. I was actually really excited. We just had OpenShift 4.20 just got released, and the external secrets operator is in the latest release, which of course ties in really well with Vault. I remember I talked to customers a couple of years ago when Hashi created Helm charts for Vault, and it was like, okay, that's a good process. It helps with the installation, but come on, I want operators to be able to handle the full life cycle. So now, we have that when it comes from a Vault standpoint.
Yeah, very exciting.